All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tolkien Collector's Guide. We are doing a live stream today to talk about primarily the release of the revised and expanded edition of the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien by Humphrey Carpenter with vast assistance from Christopher Tolkien. We're very excited to talk about this book. We're also, of course, going to talk about our guide to Tolkien's letters on our website, which is a resource we're very proud of, and we're excited to share with you what it looks like. I'm Urulókë, one of your hosts. I'll pass the ball around and have everybody else say a brief hello, and then we'll get going.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Trotter. It's great. I think it's great to finally get to doing this. We've been working on for quite a long time on trying to get everything ready for the launch of this book and to get our site ready for it and the live stream today. And I think it's all gone very well with us so far. And I think first look at the book, it's absolutely great, and I think people are really going to like it. So let's see what people think of it. I'll be interested to know.
Hey everybody, I'm Mr. Underhill. From the moment we found out that this book was coming out, we immediately set to work on updating the letters guide to go along with it, because we want it to be a companion for everybody who loves the letters of Tolkien and loves to read about Tolkien. So we hope that people will use it.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm on the trail. The new letters publication actually pushed us to launch the guide. So obviously today is a great moment for us with the publication of the letters yesterday. Without it, we may well have still been revising and honing and working on letters privately. Who knows? So we have Collins to thank for the letters, and we also have them to thank for pushing us to launch the guide when we did. So yeah, welcome everybody.
It's great to have you all here. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the new book. On the trail, why don't you kick us off just with a very brief overview of what we're seeing with this book that was just released?
Certainly. Well, first and foremost, by now most people will know, but when Humphrey Carpenter and with the help of Christopher Tolkien delivered the book to Rayner Unwin had kittens because the size of the book was enormous, and as many people who've now got the new publication can see, it is a much larger book. They were asked to trim down the book to a more manageable length, which seems insane now. We've got books of 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 pages. But back then, publishing was obviously much more complicated. It was more expensive. So they had to cut it down. And I think with the new volume, we get to see the work that went into the book after they had delivered the original version of it, the version that we see now as published. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We get more letters, we get new quotes, we learn fantastic things that we didn't know before. But we also get to look back at the original book and see the work that went into it after they had completed it to make it more focused on, one, Middle-earth, and two, was a more manageable thing. So this new version is, I believe, much more biographical on Tolkien and his family. We see a lot more about family life, Tolkien's views on war, on publishing. We get some wonderful examples of how Tolkien dealt with media, etc. So it's a wonderful new volume that, as I said, is a double-edged sword. It lets us see the original volume in a new light, in my opinion, and I hope that you all enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited as well. It's been fascinating to start looking through this book. I know it's released in the UK officially yesterday, but a couple of outlets, including HarperCollins's own store, started shipping end of last week. So there are copies in the wild. I see some of you guys in the comments have received yours in the UK. For those of us in the US, we have to wait until Tuesday is the official release day. So those copies should start showing up as well. But there's a lot of new material in here. By our count, and in the introduction from Chris Smith, over 150, I think it's 154 new letters that are not been published in in book form before. And then 45 of the letters in the first edition of Carpenter's book have been expanded. So material that was edited out for space has been restored to those. So there's fascinating material on this book is almost 40-50% longer. It's 700 pages now compared to the 400 some odd pages of the first edition text out there. And it's yeah,
I have a bit more information on this because I actually was invited to the HarperCollins launch event at the Bodleian earlier this week, and Chris Smith talked a bit more about what happened with the publication of the original publication. So when Christopher and Humphrey decided on all the letters and went through and picked them all and came up with all the ones that they wanted to do. At that point, of course, they then had a manuscript which they sent to Rainer Unwin, who was the chairman at that point of Allen and Unwin, and pretty much the editor. Both of them were very, very much friends with Rainer. But Rainer said, "Well, we just can't print this. It's too big. We just can't do it. So can you go away and reduce the size?" And Humphrey went through all the letters and gave them grade marks. So there was an A to B minus. So now I don't know which ones were A and B, but I think we can guess which one he thought were B minus, because they're the 154 that aren't in the original book.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And obviously, they also then went and cut various bits out of some of the letters because just to get the size down. So I think the other 45 changes really that were put back in again were just because there was a physical size on the size limit on the book, so they had to cut various bits out. But of course, it wasn't really ever meant to be, from Christopher and Humphrey's point of view, to be like that. They really they picked all these letters and they thought that they were worthy of being in a book about Tolkien's letters. So my view is now that I don't think that Humphrey and I imagine Christopher were very happy with the fact that these letters were cut out. Ada spent a long time actually trying to find all these letters and put them all in, and then have about a third of them removed. But I don't think they were very happy with that. But I think now, if they were still alive and around, and they actually looked at the volume that's out now, I think they'd be much happier with that. It's more what they wanted it to be in the first place. So that's what I really like about this volume. It's putting it back to their vision, I think, what they wanted in 1981. I wish they didn't. I wish they weren't able to do.
Yeah, and the there's so much interesting history I think we could go through on how the book came about. Humphrey Carpenter had done the biography, wanted to do the letters, had permission from the estate. And if you go back through old newspapers and fanzines from the late 70s, you'll find announcements from Humphrey Carpenter saying, if you ever received a letter from Tolkien, can you please send me a photocopy for consideration for inclusion of this? And so there was like a 2-year period of him trying to accumulate these before they went through the sorting process of figuring. I'm fascinated to hear this A to B minus. That's hilarious to me on the grading system.
Yeah,
At least there were no C's, you know.
Well,
there were no.
Well, yes, all the letters are good, so you can't really give that one an F, can you? So I think this is an F letter. It wouldn't have been in there in the first place if it was a bad.
He wrote no F letters. I mean, you know,
no F letters.
No. I also think this new volume is. I think it's a long time coming for a lot of people. You know, the volume 1 came out so long ago, and the sale, as we know, the sales weren't that great, and I think that's been part of the reason why it's been so long since there's been a volume 2. When you look at the letters that are out there for someone like, one of Tolkien's contemporaries like C.S. Lewis, there's so many more letters that have been published. And so I think it's really great that more of Tolkien's letters are coming to light. And I think we're all hoping, and I think a lot of people in the Tolkien community are hoping that this sort of like is a springboard to maybe even even more letters coming out and more letters being available to more readers, because I think there is a clamor from everything that I've seen online, everything I've seen in social media, on the site and everywhere, that people are very, very excited for this volume. We're all hoping that this is not the end. This is the start, right, of something else for Tolkien's letters.
I think that we all have to buy 2 copies as well.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll make sure that HarperCollins know that it's popular. So yeah, everybody out there, go and buy a second copy. One to make notes in, and another to keep pristine on the bookshelf. Buy
a foreign language copy too.
Oh yeah. So I think I'm the opposite of everyone else. I have a William Morrow edition, the review copy, and I don't have my British edition yet, which it was mailed, but it takes forever to get to.
Hey, I'm right there with you, Jeremy. I'm still waiting on my UK edition.
my new edition of the letters is a little bit special.
Well, I do have that edition.
Yeah, mine hasn't arrived yet. So this is what the new volume of letters looks like.
Well, you can't argue about the print size for that, can you, really? Say it needs to be cut because it's too big. Yeah.
And I can make my own corrections in it, which is wonderful. Jeremy, Urulókë mentioned briefly about when Humphrey Carpenter began to put this together. And for people who don't know, he did contact the Tolkien Society and various other places, literary societies, and he put in a notice in various places, including newspapers, and we have one of them. I'm not sure if, Urulókë, do you have the image that we could show of that, or shall I just read that out?
Go ahead and read it out. I can probably find the image, but I don't have it to hand immediately.
The notice he placed in the Tolkien Society journal I'm on here, he noted that the executors of J.R.R. Tolkien have decided to publish a volume of letters by Professor Tolkien. As is widely known, he was a prolific correspondent, and while the executors have carbons or drafts of many of the letters he wrote over the years, they hope to unearth many more of which he retained no copy. They have asked me to undertake the task of gathering this material, and if enough suitable letters can be collected, it is intended that Christopher Tolkien and I should be jointly responsible for editing the finished volume. I know that many members of the society wrote to Tolkien and received letters from him. I would very glad indeed to have a sight of any such letters. And he goes on with more, but he basically put these notices in newspapers, literary societies, the Tolkien Society. So he really scoured left, right, and centre for these letters. So it's lovely that they've been reinserted into this volume. I think he should be very proud.
Definitely.
Well, obviously there are more letters than are in this. Tolkien, I wouldn't hazard a guess at how many letters Tolkien must have written in his life. But I think tonight we are going to show a few of letters, and I'll start off with this one that isn't in the new book, so you won't be able to see this one. So this is a letter to Brian Miller, who was one of Tolkien's students at Oxford, and you might recognise the book is actually Brian Miller's book, but Tolkien was sent a copy by Brian of this book. So this isn't actually the one that Tolkien had. This was the one that Brian had. And people may recognise the name on there as C.T. Onions. C.T. Onions worked with Tolkien at the Oxford English Dictionary. And then I think he was he was certainly a professor of English at Oxford University, and he wrote Modern English Syntax, and Brian actually revised it in the end of the 60s and the early 70s, and sent a copy to Tolkien. And Tolkien said, "Thank you very much for sending me a copy of your revision of Onion syntax. I've never possessed a copy before." Well, so he never had the original copy, because the original copy I think came out in the 1920s or 1930s. it seems to me to be quite useful, though I cannot, of course, judge how, whether due to your attentions. Well, essentially, that probably means he hasn't read Brian's version either. That's a very polite way to do it. But the thing that I really like about this letter in particular is Tolkien signed it with biro, which is actually quite unusual, and a red biro at that. But he's also in the T. He's actually put the 3 dots for his initials. He's actually put them in the T. And I originally, when I saw this signature, I thought, this is unusual. I haven't seen one like this. But there are actually quite a few examples of where he does something like this. There's actually one in the letters where he's put an R and then he's put the 3 dots underneath it in one of his replies. And that's actually in the book, in the new book. I think it might be an older letter. I don't know if it's one of the brand new ones.
Yeah.
But it's quite nice to actually see the way that he did this. And I quite like that. I think it's quite a nice way to see and Tolkien would only really do this to people that he knew. I don't think he would, if he hadn't known the person, he wouldn't have signed it like this.
Hey, Trotter, Carl's correcting you. He's correcting you.
I don't know if you saw that comment on stream, but Carl says it's unions.
Well, it's not, it's onions, basically, because that's how you say it in English.
No,
he might pronounce it that. He might have hoped it was pronounced that way. Everyone who's English is going to pronounce it onions. So he's a bit in trouble with that one.
If my name was Onions, I think I would prefer to have.
Yeah, I figure out a way to pronounce it differently too. Yeah.
I had an old friend at school whose surname was Loaf, as in the loaf of bread, and he insisted that his name was European and it was Loaf.
Yeah, well, lots of people do that, yes. But
I don't blame him.
Unfortunately, he would always been called Onions, however he did it. I don't really get around that one. So, yeah, that's... so this is obviously, this letter's not in the... and it wouldn't really have been in there because probably the only copy of it was the one that was sent to Brian. And if Brian wasn't a member of the Tolkien Society or people wouldn't know. Carpenter and Christopher Tolkien wouldn't know that the letter even existed, really. And it's great now that these sort of things have turned up over time that we can actually get to see them.
Yeah, I think
and there's a guide. Sorry, Urulókë.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say it's good to see these, and we have to remember, that the edition we're seeing today was edited and drafted and proposed back in 1979-80 timeframe, right? So there are so many letters that Carpenter never knew of, didn't emerge on the market. Even if they came out in 82, they're not going to be in this volume because this is the volume that Humphrey Carpenter proposed for original publication, and now it's been restored. But anything that's emerged on the market or been found after, let's say, 1980 would be an excellent candidate for a volume 2 of collected letters if we could nudge HarperCollins to produce that. And honestly, the best way for us to nudge them is for this book to sell well, right? Which I have no fear. Carl,
it's really all down to book sales, really. If this book sells well, then and people and it looks like there's an appetite for further Tolkien letters, I'm absolutely convinced there will be one. However, if people think, well, I'm not going to bother buying this version of letters because I've already got the version, which I can't really see that happening. But if that was to happen and it didn't sell that well, then yes, they wouldn't be. So really, the whole thing is down to the future stuff is down to book sales.
Yeah, and the first edition, Carl Hostetter made a good point a few days ago that it didn't sell as well as the publisher hoped. They were remaindered copies, at least in the US. I think the UK printed very many fewer copies, but I think they're a little gun shy on how well this volume was going to sell. I think the market is extraordinarily different today than it was in 1981. I have no fear of what sales are going to look like here, but let me back up a little bit in the chat because there's a relevant question here. is the U.S. edition any different? And the answer is no. It is constructed, printed in the U.S., not the U.K. But the contents are absolutely
content-wise, it's not any different.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So buy it in any edition that you prefer. There are translations in the works, so international viewers, people who are in other countries that would prefer to have it in their native language instead of English. Hopefully, your needs will be addressed in the coming months. But yeah, there's ebook availability. The printed editions in the US and the UK are the same content wise. So it's well worth getting however you can find it, whatever your preferred reading method is. I think for the four of us, we're probably an overabundance of copies. The minutia, I've seen a couple comments mentioning, one for home, one for office. For me, it's, one for broad art and shelf display, and one for post-it notes and markups and dog-eared pages. Not intentionally, but man, you flip through this book enough, and no, I'm not going to fold them, but you have to read the book.
I'd like to come to a question by Constantine here. He says, we know the introduction was written by Chris Smith, but who prepared the notes or changed the numbers of the two letters? Where some notes have been prepared by Humphrey Carpenter, which ones? On that, in the guide with the letters, we've now added in the page numbers for Humphrey Carpenter's notes. But in the new edition, there are some, not many, but there are 2 or 3 notes that are clearly not Humphrey Carpenter. We know this because the information is post his lifetime. We don't know who added those notes, whether they were Wayne and Christina, or they were Chris Smith, or another editor at HarperCollins.
We do sort of know that because that was also discussed at the
brilliant.
And it's the actual people he's given the acknowledgements to, that Chris has given the acknowledgements to, are the people who actually help with the notes. So the notes came from those people.
Yeah. As to who switched around the 2 letters or suggested it, 219 and 220, I personally don't know. I don't know whether Trotter knows that answer or not.
It was Chris Smith, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was probably Chris Smith. Yeah,
because he was informed that the date was wrong, so he changed the date, and that meant changing the number of the 2 letters.
Yeah, that's my minor, not criticism, but sort of slight disappointment is that they switched those 2 letters round. Because if they were going to switch those 2, they should have also switched some others, and they should have also updated the dates where we now know the actual firm dates, thanks mostly to Wayne Hammond and Christina Skull. So if they were going to change 2 of them, they should have changed around about 25 of them, not just 2 of them. But that's a minor criticism, really, in the grand scheme. I think they've done a remarkable job bringing back notes that were lost in many cases, and obviously some of them have had to be not invented, but were there in the original manuscript and probably maybe didn't make a lot of sense anymore, and there was probably a lot of work that went into that. And Chris Smith has done this with the only acknowledgement to himself being an introduction. They have not put his name on the cover. This is designed to be Humphrey Carpenter and Christopher Tolkien's originally conceived version of the letters, and I think that's testament to the work that Chris Smith and HarperCollins have done on this, that they don't shout about the modern aspects. I think it shows a lot of respect.
They haven't, and the notes and things are actually quite important because when the original book was done, obviously Christopher and Humphrey would have done the notes, but after that, when you put a new letter in, and it's got certain initials, or it's got a dot or something, and you know who is a dot that they're talking about. You don't know. The notes are quite an important part of the book, and they're actually quite a substantial part of the book, and a very important bit. So the footnotes are actually, if you actually are reading the letters, I think make sure that you have a look at the footnotes as well, because they're going to give you a lot more context of what's in that letter.
Yeah. So I want to break in just briefly here. Things came up after we scheduled this, and Mr. Underhill has a hard stop coming up. So before we say goodbye and start bringing on some other guests, I wanted to hand the stage to him just to chat for a few minutes before he leaves. Floor is yours, Mr. Underhill.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I have to work for a living. Sorry, y'all. I have a work thing I can't get out of. So one of the things that we did, one of the things we thought might be fun for everybody, it was certainly fun for us, was to kind of go through some of the new letters as we were putting them in the database, kind of running through and drafting summaries for everything before, while everything was still in the building stages. We thought it would be interesting to pick out letters that we thought we could highlight and that people would be interested in, and we each kind of picked out 2 or 3. I picked out 2. I'm going to read one of the 2 that I picked out, and that's kind of what I want to leave everybody with before I have to sign off here. So one of the letters that I picked was a letter that Tolkien wrote in the summer, in August actually, of 1954 to Catherine Farrar about Tolkien's mostly talking about the Lord of the Rings and morality in the Lord of the Rings. There's a pretty interesting comment that he leaves Catherine with at the end of the letter. So I want to read a couple of paragraphs and kind of leave you with just kind of some of the things that you'll see. There's lots of new letters like this that give you a better indication as to who Tolkien was, kind of as a man. The other one I picked out is very interesting too, and I encourage you to read that one, because that one's more about, you learn more about Tolkien and his value in relationships and things. But okay, so this one is to Catherine Farrar regarding, so this is summer 54, Fellowship has just come out, right? And so he writes to Catherine, he says, "I do think that it is nice of you to show me the draft of your review, but as you are probably the most sensitive and perceptive of my prime readers, there is no need to feel any trepidation. In fact, I was delighted that you stressed the morality. I think actually it is that which gives the story its realness and coherence, which my critics seem to feel rather than my pictorial vividness. It was not planned, of course, but arose naturally in the attempt to treat the matter seriously. But it is now the foundation. For me, the kernel is in Frodo's last words to Sam. I have been too deeply hurt. I have tried to save the Shire, and it has been saved, but not for me. It must often be so, Sam, when things are in danger. Someone has to give them up, lose them, so that others may keep them. All that I had or might have had, I leave to you." And then he goes on to say, he gives a little bit about elves. "Also, I think you were right in not using the name elves. It is hopelessly spoilt. This use of mine really does come down from the time when this stuff was only a private world. And though there will be a note on the Eldar and the Anglicization at the end, that is still some way off, and not all, I fancy, will get there." And then he leaves her with this comment, which I thought was really funny. "There was quite a long and appreciative notice in the Oxford Times of last Friday. I discover the writer, bless him or her, had evidently enjoyed it and was not too sophisticated as to try to pretend that he had not." And so there's, Tolkien had a great sense of humor, and I think that's lost a lot of the time. And so there's a lot of things like that where you get a sense of Tolkien, the person. And so that's a fantastic letter, I think, and is one of many fantastic in the new letters. So, but I encourage y'all to explore them and look for new things that you find interesting, and come to Tolkien Collector's Guide and share them with us. And we're always happy to have conversations about all things related, not just collecting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Underhill, and we will see you again as soon as we possibly can on the channel.
I'll be around.
That's a great segue, I think. On the Trail is pushing up we've just started a subreddit for Tolkien Guide as well, and there's some conversation started there already on people's favorite letters and stuff. So on our guide, Reddit, Trotter has good presence on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. Just reach out to us. We'd love to have conversations about your favorite letters across pretty much all of social media, Facebook included. So yeah, it's exciting times. There's so much that we have been enjoying ourselves. We're so excited for you guys to also start seeing these letters. Andrew, do you have a particular reading queued up? I have one ready to go. We can do as well.
I'm going to show. I'll just show another letter. I think it's probably
awesome.
the.
Do you want me to read out from my favorite from the new? While we wait,
let me get. He's got it ready. Let's pull this up.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Right. So this letter is quite an interesting one. It's not in the new book, but because it wasn't a letter that was known about at the time. One of the things you can't really see, I don't know if I can hold it up so people can see this, but one of the nice things about Tolkien Letters is the he actually stamped his address at the top. It's quite hard to see it. So it's embossed. Can you see it there? Can you see the embossing?
It's barely showing up, but yeah, there it is. It's coming through a bit.
Yeah, so it's actually quite nice that to see these letters with the embossing on. So basically, what the letter's about is that someone sent Tolkien a tape. Now, in 1966, this wouldn't have been a cassette tape. This would have been a reel-to-reel tape. And we all know that Tolkien liked reel-to-reel tapes and talking in Gothic to them to get rid of devils and all that sort of stuff. So he actually had a reel-to-reel recorder, which I think probably he borrowed on a long-term loan from the university, because he encouraged them to buy one, and then I think eventually they asked for it back. So I think it was in his house for quite a long time. He was very, very keen on being able to record his voice. But in this case, he's actually said that, thank you for sending me the tape, but I never actually read it, which is actually quite nice. I Lord listened to it, so he sent it back. And he then started the complaining about Ace, which is always nice to see this. Mm-hmm. So every letter, this letter's not, you can see is May 1966. All his letters at that point, every single one pretty much, he put something in about the Ace paperback controversy, and you'll see those in the new volume as well. If you look round about 1966, 65, they're all round Tolkien arena. And one of the letters that I did mention on the review was one where Donald Wollheim, who was obviously the owner of Ace, said that he wanted to set up a Tolkien award. Which is great, really, sending that to Tolkien. So I want a Tolkien award, and then Tolkien says, "I'd much rather you paid authors than set up an award for them." It's a fantastic reply. You just pay people. Don't set awards up for them. Just actually pay them. And one of the things that I found from doing the guide with the letter that's actually up on the screen, which I hadn't realised, was that Tolkien wrote another 2 letters to this address. And I had no idea. And basically, it's something that was quite nice to come out on the guide, was why you can actually, I found that there was 2 more letters sent later on to exactly the same address. And I think they were sent to Mr. Walker's daughters. Actually got sent to 2 letters. So it's things like this is where having a database is actually very useful. And again, it's something that Humphrey and Christopher didn't have at the time. And you think how much easier their life would have been for doing something like this if they'd actually had a database of all the letters. I think they were using card indexes and things on those lines to originally do this, and to then try and add them together. Whereas on a computer, it's quite easy to to see if it's the same. Yes, you can see that there's 3 of them, and these are all the same address. So the one at the top is the one that's on the screen, but the other 2 are yeah. So it says Miss Walker, so I assume it's this Mr. Walker's daughter, is what I'm guessing, that he wrote to.
I've never even spotted that before, Trotter, that it was the same address.
Yes.
Yeah. Even in our own guide, there's still things to
We're still discovering stuff.
Well, I think I've
day in
actually
and out.
linked them as
Yeah.
well now. So you actually, if
Yep.
you go to one letter, it's actually got a link on there that says that,
good, yeah.
that they are
With
linked
our-
to the other ones.
Mhm.
With our see also, now that we've
Yeah.
added, which is
Actually,
great.
no, I haven't. I need to go and do that. Actually, I need to link them because they're all to the same place.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so that's
Urulókë is our next guest in, or is our first guest backstage?
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I will read from probably my favourite of the quotes in the new letters, and that will actually lead me on very quickly to Roach. A big thanks to Roach, who's looking after our chat. My favourite quote comes from 1937, 15th of October, 1937, in a letter to Stanley Unwin. And Tolkien says, "Curiously enough, chests of drawers have also given me trouble. I still think them rather ominous. My daughter, aged 8, has long distinguished between literary and actual terrors. She can take any amount of dragon and a reasonable dose of goblin. But we recently had to change all the handles on the chest of drawers in her room because the former handles grinned at her, even in the dark. Not the subject matter, but the time is the real mistake. Bedtime is usually a foolish parental indulgence, popular, of course, because so many of the young folk will do anything to postpone the fatal moment. But as far as I can see, arithmetic is quite as likely to produce disordered sleep as dragons if administered or self-administered too late." I think that's wonderful. Reminds me much of myself as an 8-year-old, and I love that description of dragons, of her loving dragons and being fine with goblins, but the handles on her drawers were too much. I think that's really, really beautiful.
it is as well, and particularly since when you look at some of
The way Tolkien
the Ishna
describes
stuff that
his
Tolkien
children.
did. There's one in there, isn't there, where he was doing something about being scared in his one of the pictures.
Absolutely.
Along those lines.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the same time, whether that was something that came from Priscilla. It could have done.
Yeah. Oh, quite possibly. And that leads me on. Urulókë mentioned that we now have an r//Tolkien guide on Reddit. And Roach again, thank you very much, commented, I had made a note to look at this term that he used because I hadn't come across it before. I hadn't come across the word. And Roach points out in letter 80A that Tolkien is discussing daughters. And he describes the birth of Priscilla as gracious and empriding. And Roach points out that the word "empride" is obsolete, with the last quotation being from 1652, the earliest form of it in 1410. So
It's
obviously,
quite a late
empride-
word then for Tolkien, isn't it? Really?
Well, it is quite a late
It's
word.
a very late word to use.
It is
Yes.
a late
Mhm.
word, and let's be fair. But I really liked that word, empriding. And Roach goes on to say that Priscilla is quite possibly a gift to him from God, and I think I agree. I think that's why he uses such an old, obsolete word. In that letter, Tolkien goes on to say that Priscilla is typing a vast romance, which at this time, she's a teenager, I assume. I haven't got the date in front of me of that letter, 88. And she is typing a vast romance. He doesn't mention The Lord of the Rings, but he clearly is talking about The Lord of the Rings. So he kind of had everybody in there. But he doesn't mention that he was giving her a penny a page or paying her for corrections. or mistakes that she spotted. So maybe he was paying Christopher and not the other children. Maybe it was.
Well, I think some of the letters do mention her typing some of the Lord of the Rings, and I assume that he was paying her for doing the typing, because he mentions things like fees in there for
He does,
to his children for
yeah.
actually paying them for typing, and I've got to guess for finding mistakes like the dwarfs had the wrong hats on and the wrong coloured hats and all that sort of stuff, and drat the boy when he tells him that sort of thing. Yes, he was called this last week, and this week he's called something else. And well, it's great having that Tolkien did that as well. Actually, he used his children to basically assist with the
definitely
the books.
So, so yeah, we've mentioned this a little bit in our announcements today. We're hopefully going to have a bunch of special guests on the show today. We're going to go a little bit out of order just due to scheduling and availability. We have a very special guest who's sitting in the wings. I'd like to, he needs zero introduction, absolutely. Hopefully some of you will recognize his name, but we're very excited today to have Mr. Brian Sibley join us to talk about the release of this new volume, some of your connections with Humphrey and Christopher throughout the years, not relating directly to the book, but it's fantastic to have you, and welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for coming, Brian.
Well, it was very thrilling. I saw Andrew the other night when the book was being launched in Oxford, and very, very exciting. I didn't realize, as I guess many other people didn't, just how big the book was in comparison with its predecessor. So I've only just started dipping into it, but it's really exciting. I mean, in fact, just leafing through and looking for those letters A, B, C, D, or whatever, following the numbers, and realizing just how many letters we didn't have, and the things that they covered and included. Many of them very domestic, and I love those. I was just reading a letter a moment ago where he's writing to Christopher that the raspberries and plums are rolling in, and that they're harvesting their local, the garden fruits. Well, of course, Christopher was in the forces for World War II. Anyway, fascinating, yes, and it's a great pleasure.
Yeah, there's quite an interesting letter in there about. He says it's during the war. He says that they have lots of oranges, which I found that quite strange, because I remember watching an episode of Dad's Army where the raffle prize was an orange. And this was during the war. So Tolkien says, I've got lots of oranges. I wonder where he's getting them from, unless he knew some person who had an orangery or something.
Maybe on the black market.
On the black market, yeah, definitely black market oranges.
I think one of the things that you young guys can't hope to appreciate, though, but I'm sure you know it as a fact, is just how important this book was in its first edition. I'm talking about when it first appeared, because I'm old enough, being 74, that I remember the publication of, well, first of all, Humphrey's biography, and then followed by the Silmarillion shortly after, and then waiting a few more years to get the letters. But how important they were is sort of quite difficult to understand nowadays, because fans of Tolkien's work have so much material available to them. I mean, all the stuff online in your site and elsewhere, but also books galore. I mean, at the time when we're talking about, when these books first appeared, there were no other books really. There was a couple of American pieces of scholarship, academics had written a couple of books, but I think on my bookshelf, I think I had perhaps 3 books about Tolkien or 4 books about Tolkien, whereas now you need an entire bookcase to accommodate them. So it is extraordinary, but because of that, this material was so important to us when it first appeared. You know, the excitement when the Silmarillion came out, and the realization that there was information about Tolkien and hints, of course, not just about what was going to be in the Silmarillion, but things even older than that, which are referenced in Humphrey's biography. This was like the beginning of meeting Tolkien and understanding more about him. So they were hugely important. I was very fortunate because I knew Humphrey not as a Tolkienian actually, but as a Carolian, because we both happened to be members of the Lewis Carroll Society. Indeed, at the time, I was secretary of the society. I progressed to being president now, but you know that's taken a few years. And I invited Humphrey to come and talk to the Lewis Carroll Society, and of course he was not just his knowledge of Tolkien was already evident, but he had also, of course, terrific knowledge of children's literature, and indeed wrote a wonderful book called Secret Gardens about writers of children's literature. So, in fact, my copy of the first edition of the letters is inscribed to me, to Brian Sibley, fellow Carolian, with best wishes from Humphrey. That amuses me that sort of neither of us, although I have written articles and things about Lewis Carroll, I've never written a book about Lewis Carroll, nor actually did Humphrey, not specifically. So we started out as Carolians, but ended up as Tolkienians. And that book, I mean, the biography I'm talking about now, was just so seminal because here was a real sense of who this man, J.R.R. Tolkien, was. You know, the first glimpse that we had of something more than just a name on the spine and the jacket of a book or two books. And I later knew Humphrey as much as anything as a broadcaster, because we both worked for the BBC's arts program Kaleidoscope as reviewers or presenters of that program, and so we met as broadcasters. And broadcasting was, of course, the career that Humphrey had already chosen and was being successful in. But it was this biography of J.R.R. Tolkien that made it possible for him to move into writing rather than being just a voice on the radio, which he'd been at BBC Oxford. So it was a liberating book for him, though he didn't know it at the time, of course, because he didn't know it would lead to so many other biographies. But his skill as a biographer was already evident in the pages of the Tolkien biography. And, you know, I've always felt very, very strongly that sometimes the earliest biography of somebody, often writers, but it can be true of artists, filmmakers, whatever, sometimes the first biography is always, in a way, the most precious to the rest of us, mainly because quite often the people had very, very close access to the material they were using. Another example would be Lewis Carroll, because Lewis Carroll's first biographer was his nephew and godson, Stuart Dodson Collingwood. The book came out within a year of Lewis Carroll's death. And there's masses of material that is not in it. But here is somebody who actually knew the man, related to him as well, and is able to talk about them in the instant, the moment, if you like. And I think that Humphrey's book captures that feeling. It's very much a book that is, though it's in terms of the knowledge and information we have about the man and his opinions and so on, I think that there is within it that still today makes it a hugely important and powerful book. So I think we're very fortunate, and we're now doubly fortunate because the letters were really important, but now we can actually see exactly what Christopher and Humphrey were striving to do with putting together Tolkien's letters. And as somebody I think remarked recently, I don't know if it was on the launch, that this is in a sense the closest we have to Tolkien's autobiography, because the man is writing about whatever he wants to write about. receiving £140 for The Hobbit. Now, surprised he is, and maybe it's taking off again. Lovely touches like that. But more seriously, talking about his faith, talking very frankly and intimately with Christopher about sex, for example, and sex and marriage,
and Michael.
And Michael. Maybe I think there's one to Christopher as well.
Some of the things that he brings up, for instance, he says to Christopher, you really don't want to forget to send your mother a birthday card. Now, that's excellent advice, really, and that's the sort of thing I wish my dad had told me, because I didn't say, because you get into so much trouble for not doing those. I think it's great. Yeah, I like things like that. Very important.
As people say, you only forget the wife or your partner's birthday once.
I think, Brian, you make a really good point about the new volume. I said earlier on at the beginning of the stream that we get to see the work, comparing both books side by side now. We get to see the work that was done by Humphrey and Christopher. But you do raise an excellent point that with the new edition, we see that the intention of the editor and his assistant was not to make such a centered volume based around, say, Middle Earth and with other bits tagged on. Their actual intention was far more general, to show Tolkien in a much more intimate light, talking more about Edith's religion, seeing firsthand the desperate, almost despair at times he felt when he hadn't heard from Christopher for days during wartime, and we do get a sense of that in the first volume, but we do see more now with this restored volume, that their intention was very different to what you received in 1981, because I'd like to say that I remember it, but I was born in 1981, so I definitely didn't remember it first time around.
And also quite liberated in the range of topics that were being talked about. I mean, one can kind of understand why the book became much more Middle Earth centric. I mean, obviously, when they decided they had to edit it, they had to cull it, then clearly those things got priority and were kept. But the fact that they were, and how liberal Christopher was being. He clearly could have imposed all kinds of sanctions on what Humphrey was using, and yet he had been originally happy for many of these topics to be discussed in the book. So it totally gives us a new education for how the relationship between Humphrey and Christopher worked at the time. And I think it's worth saying also that this book is a tremendous tribute to Chris Smith, who has now made it into something we can all share, because his work has been another labor of love in getting this together. All we need now, of course, is another edition with all the letters that weren't there. But I think it's kind of right that this book stands now in the way that it does. You could have said, oh well, let's add another 50 letters. That's another 100 letters that nobody's read or have only been published in other places. Let's put them into it. But this does make this book very, very particular, because it is the book which Humphrey clearly envisaged, but not only envisaged, but managed to get Christopher to go along with and be happy with the framework and the shaping of it. So I think that's why it's important.
I think that's fascinating as well, because when I think Chris mentioned that one of the letters, Christopher and Humphrey sent 6 letters between themselves, arguing over a comma. Now, it doesn't actually say in the book it was 6 letters, but Chris said it was. Imagine having 6 letters just to argue about a comma, really. But they wanted to get it right, and I think that was why, and it was actually worth the. Obviously, it was worth arguing about. I still haven't worked out. I need to ask Chris actually if the comma's in there or not, because I couldn't.
He did quote the letter. He did say the page.
He did. Yeah, I'm going to ask him if the letter's there or not.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, and it's a fascinating, having looked at many letters at this point where we see Tolkien's handwriting and he's rushing, and it can be extremely difficult. Is that a comma? Is that something from the line below it that extended up? Is that a spurious pen mark? And a comma can change the sense of a sentence, you know. So I can see exactly. Comments can be inconsequential, but reading his handwriting can be a challenge to know what he intended to say when you're editing this into a typescript that you're then going to put into a book.
I think it's also interesting that you know, we think of inevitably, as one does with people who you admire, we think of them with a sense of awe, and people do with Tolkien quite clearly. But what I love about so many of the letters is the ease and informality of the way in which he frequently writes. Now, of course, yes, he quotes tags in Latin and a lot of detail about different things. But there's also a sense in which he just adopts a very simple, colloquial way of speaking that has a great immediacy. I mean, you know, you absolutely know this is the man with possibly many letters to write and lots of papers to mark and you know, books to review and all the rest of it, but who has an ease with his correspondence. You know, he doesn't he adopts simple forms of words. He drops the subject matter. I mean, I am one of the way he's writing. This is a letter in the first edition where he's writing about the maps to the Middle Earth and says to Rayner Unwin, not to Rayner, I mean to his father. He says something like, and so we come to the maps, and I'm stumped, don't know what to do. You know, I mean, the way in which he writes, it's of the moment, and then there's an immediacy about it. And I remember somebody telling me once of attending one of I can't remember who this was who's told me, attended one of Tolkien's lectures. And Tolkien would kind of start the moment he was, well, I think opening the door of the lecture theatre, walking in, and would just kind of stream this stream of consciousness, information and knowledge until he walked out. You know, it just didn't stop. It was up to you. You had to catch up with it all. And I think there's a sort of urgency about his correspondence, which I find quite interesting. You know, there's an urgency, obviously, in things like whether he's hearing from Christopher and what's happening to him at the front and so on. But also there's a different urgency. There's an urgency about understanding. You know, the need to understand the world we live in, and also his writing and his faith, particularly his faith. There's so much more about Tolkien's faith here and Edith's faith that is important new material, or important to have it in one place anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think I completely agree with that. You take a letter, like assume people might have read a letter called 131, which fortunately didn't get a new number. It still is 131. But I love the start of that letter where it says, "This is a brief description of the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings," and then it's 33 pages in the new book worth of brief description, and it's absolutely fantastically actually having that letter now means that you've got such a great summary, which he's written himself, of his own books. They're just so good to actually have that. And also now, with that letter, you've also got the other books he wanted to write as well at the end. This is what I wanted to do. I've not seen that before as well. So there's just another thing that's in if you want to see what Tolkien was thinking he wanted to produce, it's there now. There's a list.
When we started adding these letters and we came to 131, we were dealing with changes to how we add footnotes, for instance, for our own use for drafting summaries and tags into our letters. And it was extraordinary to look over the published version the versions that have been available in the Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion and a French volume, which I won't embarrass myself by trying to say right now, and seeing them back together, and then all of a sudden getting to the end of that letter and looking at what? There's more. Wait, there's more that we absolutely do not know of yet, and it's right there.
Well, letter 131 as well was actually quite interesting because I had to get Jeremy to redo some of the database because we couldn't fit it into the database as it was. It wouldn't work. It actually stopped it from working because it was so long, it just wouldn't fit.
Yeah.
I mean, we should remember, of course. I mean, this is not to. You're absolutely right in everything you said, but we should, of course, remember that letter 131, which was written to Martin Waldman, was a letter that was desperate, written in desperate straits, really, because Tolkien was in the position where he didn't think there was any chance of George Allen and Unwin publishing The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, and he was desperate to find possibly another publisher, and possibly through Martin Waldman, William Collins, who might take the project on. So he was also doing a salesman's job as well. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right, Andrew, in saying that the outline of what are both the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings is matchless and perfect. But of course, there was also an urgency of needing a publisher. So and he was a convincing salesman, I would have said. He didn't manage to convince Waldman any more than he'd managed to convince.
Well, Waldman wasn't sort of convinced. It was that Waldman actually decided was doing other stuff for Collins. He wasn't there anymore, and I think that was where the problem came.
There was what my understanding of letter 131, the history of it. Now I can't remember where I'm quoting this from, but I believe that when Milton Waldman received that letter, he had a typescript made of it. First of all, because it was handwritten. So we had a typescript made. But it's interesting, Brian, you say that Tolkien was a great salesman. I wonder whether we look at that now as what we know of Tolkien's popularity. And it's funny when we look at, if we look at the letter in isolation from 1951 and we say, right, there's only The Hobbit to go on. And yes, it's been popular. But interestingly, Milton Waldman was sold on it, to the point where he had a typescript made. I feel that the mistake he made was actually not editing that letter down to maybe a 2-page document to take to his bosses at Collins to say, look, this is what we've got, and drip feed them more like a sort of CV size document. Because being faced with this typescript, if I was the boss of Collins, I would have read this and gone, Milton, you're absolutely crazy.
It's an unknown author, pretty much at that point as well.
Exactly, and it's also at that point in time, it's also an unknown quantity. So I think that I think we maybe I'm incorrect, but I believe that we all, and you're young enough to do this as well, to look at it through the more modern lens of Tolkien's popularity. To say, Tolkien was a great salesman, because we read that letter and go, oh my God, if Tolkien only ever published letter 131, people would still be talking about him to this day if he was an unsuccessful author.
But what it does show, you're absolutely right to put it in that context, but what of course it absolutely leaves us in no doubt is just how much he believed in the material that he was creating. There's no, he's not making any allowances for, is this too long for a single book or 2 books? Or, he himself is sold on what he's selling. And that's why I say he was a good salesman. You're right. He wasn't. But you're right. He was absolutely right. He wasn't canny enough to tease it into a way that might have seduced the publisher more easily, particularly at a time when publishing was finding it so difficult with the cost of paper and post-war and so on. So all of that's understandable. But you cannot read that letter and think this man is just making stuff up. You're reading what somebody is writing as though it was history already. Even before it was fully formed and written, he's writing about it as though it was something factual. It has a kind of authenticity. You know, it's like the gospel writers. There's something about it that makes you say, this is written by somebody who has seen this. I mean, whether that's true or not, you get that feeling that Tolkien has been to this place. He knows what this place is like. And he's telling you about it. You know,
100%. I would say, you mentioned about Tolkien's urgency in letters, and one thing I love about transcribing Tolkien's letters, and I know the guys agree with this also. You get a sense sometimes of what Tolkien is doing and where he's sitting. Sometimes you know he's in the garage late at night and he's got his little heater on and he's got his pipe in hand. And I said today I spent a little time with Alan Sisto on his Today's Tolkien Times program. People will notice that the beard has grown a lot in 2.5 hours. And like Tim mentioned earlier on, Tim Bolton, that I look very different with the beard. And 2 hours ago, I was almost clean shaven. And you could sense the urgency sometimes that Tolkien wrote. And on the odd occasion, he would get to the end of 2 pages and say, I'm really sorry, I hope you can understand me, but I wrote this very quickly. And then he would continue at the same pace for the next 2 pages. And you think, well, slow down. Slow down a little bit, you know, explain yourself. But the Milton Waldman letter is very considered. It's a professional assessment, and there is no sort of whimsical edge to it in the sense that he's selling it. It is a selling tool, and I agree. He sold it very well. My point is that it's Milton Waldman who sold it poorly. He should have edited that down to a manageable content to take to his bosses, who then may have looked at it and said, this sounds really interesting. But Tolkien had given in condensed form, obviously.
Yeah. I think I think we could talk for the next 3 hours about letter 131. Yes. I want to take a moment here to say we've got some other lovely guests I want to get in and get their voices on the conversation as well. And so I'm gonna bring them up on stage. It looks like they're all ready, and then we'll do a quick round of introductions, and then we're just gonna go wherever the conversation takes us again. So first of all, Putri, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's extremely late there. It's lovely to see you face to face. I know we've chatted on social media back and forth a little bit over the years, but welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. And I'm so glad because, it's basically 3 a.m. here. So please forgive us with my brain.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here. When you need to leave, feel absolutely free to say goodbye, drop off, whatever you need to do. But we're very happy to have you. I'm going to bring the other 2 guests on board so we can have our full party. And then we'll just dive back into talking about this book and what it means to each of us. So my next 2 guests I'm going to bring on here are Dr. Larsen, Dr. Brown. Welcome, both of you. It's so good to have you here as well.
Thanks for inviting me.
Before we go more general, I just want to ask Brian one question that's totally unrelated to letters. Brian, this is completely hypothetical. If the BBC ever came to you and asked you to do a modern remastered version of The Lord of the Rings, would you consider inserting the adventures of Tom Bombadil audio into it in a remastered form? I'd love to know.
Well, as I then later dramatized Tom Bombadil in my series called Tales of the Perilous Realm, the scripts are there. So maybe. I mean, I know why I did it at the time, and I did it at the time simply because I had 26 half hours, and if something had to go, and that would have been Absolutely. 2 episodes, and 2 episodes would have been 2 episodes of something left. Or something else that wouldn't have been there. But why not? Why not? I mean, sadly, the cast we had for Perilous Tales, Perilous Realm, was not the same cast apart from Michael Hordern narrating it as Gandalf. So I wouldn't kind of fit just to edit it in. I don't know that I'd ever want to see the thing re-recorded now, because despite the fact that there are things in it which I would like to change, it is what it is, and it's beloved by a lot of people for what it is.
It's too iconic to change. It's great.
I wouldn't change it.
What I wish is that the BBC, I think I've asked 3 times in my latter years, would let me do something with the Silmarillion that could be intriguing and radiophonic, but they haven't got the courage to do it yet. So who knows?
Who knows?
But thank you for the question.
There's a chance. There's a chance.
So
I am sorry about jumping in on.
Well, no, it's very
Sara
simple. I mean, I believe. I'm sure I've said this many times, but I believe that when Tolkien was writing the book, and we know that it's part of the importance of the way in which he wrote, that he was discovering so much of the story as he was writing it, and I think that you see it in those particular early chapters. I mean, the fact that he wrote to Christopher and talked about meeting this character Strider, or Trotter, of course, as he was previously, and not really knowing who he was, even though we know that he turned out to be this character who was so important to the whole story. He is the king of the Return of the King. The fact that he wrote in that way, I don't think he had the opportunity to think, is this Tom Bombadil business an unnecessary diversion? And I think for me, when I was trying to put it into some kind of dramatic form, it just seemed to me absolutely straightforward that the moment the Black Riders appear, that's the story you have to follow. You can't follow all this other incidental stuff, magical and wonderful though it is. You can't follow that. You've got to stick with the thing that's the driving force of the story, which is bad people chasing good people. It's as simple and crass as that, actually. But
I mean, we could spend another few hours talking about adaptation and the differing needs that go in there. No, it's awesome. In my mind, before I want to move on back to letters in just a second, but to close out Tom Bombadil, Tolkien, it showed up in the drafts of The Return of the Shadow we see from Christopher's History of Middle-earth very early on, and that was in the 40s. And he edited this book himself and rewrote for a decade before it was published, and Tom Bombadil never left, right? It was critical to his story. And again, that's not speaking to adaptation. I know the needs for radio and movies and TV shows are vastly different. So I think the right choice was made for the BBC radio play. But I also think when people say, why is Tom Bombadil there? There are answers, and we might find them someday. Unfortunately, I don't recall seeing any letters in the new edition that flat out state, this is who Tom Bombadil is. This is why I put him in there. We're going to have to keep waiting. But
wouldn't it be great if we discovered that there was something that he'd written at the end of the book? Because every other character in the book, their story is tied up and resolved in the closing chapters. And Tom Bombadil doesn't reappear. And it's that, what happened? Did he stop by and see Aubrey and Tom, on the way back? I don't know.
So letters wise, Brian, you received your copy. I think you may have gotten it earlier this week, but for our 3 other guests who just joined us, I don't know if you've seen it yet. So I want to go around the table with you and ask, first edition wise, if you have a favorite letter, a little bit of your background with Tolkien's letters, and then something you might be looking forward to if you haven't seen the new book yet, or if you have seen it, if you've got a particular favorite there. I'll pass the stage to Putri first to see what your thoughts are on Tolkien's letters. And thank you for joining us again, by the way.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me. And yeah, regarding of Tolkien's letters, I probably would be one of the people who would, later buy the book really late after everybody else. But speaking about Tolkien's letters, I personally love it because I think I see Tolkien's letters as like some kind of, maybe like a bridge between the author and the world that he lived in and his writings, because um, a lot of my favorite letters from Tolkien, I found out that they often are letters, for example, letters for fans, for his readers, when he talk about basically, a lot of things that did not necessarily connect to his writing process, or even if there is a connection to writing process, the specific event, like background event, the reason why he wrote that letter to this very specific reader or fan was very unique, like specific. Like, for example, there is this one letter that I recently read and shared, a letter that he wrote for John Carroll, date 15 March 1942. In this letter, he was in the process of basically writing The Lord of the Rings, and in this letter, he described. He told John that he was writing the Hobbit sequel, so not naming it The Lord of the Rings. And he told him about what he could expect in his story later, and the characters that would appear. And while it seems like this is another like nice letter for fan, but I specifically love the fact that the background event, when where he wrote that letter to John, is that John was a student evacuated during the World War II at Cannon From Court in Hertfordshire. So, and I saw the picture of the letter too, and it was a very someone pointed out that that letter had very beautiful penmanship, like very carefully written, like like the type of letter that would make you feel so special when you receive it. So I mean, imagining being this school student, and you wrote a letter to the author that you love because he wrote the book that you love, and during that situation, and then you got a very thoughtful reply, long, detailed, thoughtful reply, like he really sat down there and very carefully wrote that letter for him. So I really love letters that describe basically the environment, the specific event, the specific background event that that became the reason or the background of why those letters were written. And sometimes the letter is probably very short, like the one that he wrote for Patrick Wilson in January 1973. Very short letter, but very meaningful and very compassionate, because Patrick Wilson was in prison at the time, and the letter was very short, but very. I mean, I imagine it would be very meaningful, because it says here that this was on 25 January 1973. So Tolkien wrote that I have had very dark days of my own in my time, and I do hope that yours will soon be over. And not only he sent a letter, he also sent his picture, the one where he sat under the tree and smiling, the one that was taken by Violet Potter. So I really love those kinds of letters. And there are a lot of other letters that I like for example, when the rather funny one when he visited the lecture of Robert Graves, and he was introduced to some beautiful woman that he didn't know, and then turned out that woman was actually Ava Gardner, but he didn't recognize her. When he walked down the steps with Robert Graves, and he saw this camera people, pointing their cameras but not to graves, but to somebody next to them, you know. And he didn't know who that person was until he was introduced to that person. He described Alpha as a lovely young woman, and I think that was and in the same letter, I believe I hope affectionately, called Robert an ass. So I love those kinds of letters that gave context to you know, basically his environment, uh, and I think the reason why is not because I'm not interested to about his other letters that describe his writing process, not at all, but I think it's because you know, this next part is probably a little bit of left field, maybe like most of my Tolkien Tuesday posts, a little bit of left field. But the reason why I'm very interested about these kinds of letters is also because you know, for those who know me, maybe understand that I really love the storytelling aspect of Tolkien's writing, because I'm very interested in the thematic connections in the you know, especially in the folkloric aspects of Tolkien's storytelling that that I found connection with to the folklore of you know, my own culture, because the you know, reading something like Tolkien's works is something that I cannot do in vacuum. You know, like I cannot just see his works like you know, like separated from everything else. I cannot. I mean, obviously it's not the case of any other works, of course. Like sometimes you want to enjoy some kind of work just because you want to enjoy that work and nothing else, you know, like you know, like for example, when I watch Cocaine Bear, I did not mean to make it an aspirational thing. You know, I just want to watch a movie where a bear ingests cocaine and kill a lot of people. But you know, but for something like Tolkien's works, it's different. Like it's different. Like I cannot separate it from my memories, my experience, my knowledge. You know, it I cannot enjoy it in vacuum, and that probably explains why my blog post, my Tolkien Tuesday post, and the last time I joined Tolkien Society seminar. Yeah, well, you probably and also because maybe because currently I'm also having the reading experience with another collection of letters, you know, and these letters were written by somebody who had really great value here in my country. Her name was Kartini, and the works that the only works that she left were just letters, because even though she was regarded as one of the early basically early figures in uh, Indonesian nationalism movements in late 19th century and early 20th century, and she was also regarded as a feminist thinker. But the only works that she left are only letters, because she died young. She died at 25 years old.
Wow.
So yeah, she came from an aristocratic family in Java, which means that even though Indonesia was, of course, not Indonesia at the time. Indonesia at the time was Dutch East Indies. And as a member of an aristocratic family in Java, she got a lot of privileges. One of them was that she could access education at Dutch schools with boys, and her family's connection also gave her connection to a lot of influential figures in the Netherlands, including at that time the Indisch Minister of Education, Jacques Hendrik Abendanon, and she constantly wrote letters, wrote correspondences with them, mostly in Dutch. So yeah, and many these letters contain her thoughts. Many of her thoughts, many of them are very insightful, and she was basically like ahead of her time in discussion about women's rights and women's rights, especially in education, and her thoughts about like her goals in basically related to Indonesia's early nationalist movement. And but after she died, when Hendrik Abendanon published her letters, while he had good intention, like he wanted people to see Kartini, to see the letters as how Kartini saw them. Obviously, he also curated a lot of them to, basically to soften Kartini's view on some delicate matters, and he also didn't want to offend some important figures, so he deliberately curated those letters. When those letters were published in 1911, like 7 years after her death at 25 years old, so it was a heavily curated version. But 2 years ago, in 2021, the website of the University of Monash finally published the English version of all of her letters, like like every correspondence she had ever done, like every piece of letter, not censored, not heavily curated, and her complete writings, they were in total like around 900 pages. And yeah, and you can actually download them for free. And to me, it's interesting because the project of collecting her letters here was done by the senior research fellow at Monash University, Jus Cote. And in the introduction of the book, there was this line that made me intrigued because, as like I said before, when her letters were first published by Abendanon in 1911, obviously the curation of her letters was deliberate. So the absence of some of the very important context of her letters was deliberately done. So in the introduction of this book by Cote, he said that when you want to really understand who Kartini was and her thoughts, and you have to have a proper appreciation of the emotions and motivations that led to the writing. So it requires
Putri?
like
Putri?
Yes.
Sorry, just to cut in for a moment, just quickly. Brian has to leave, so we just want to say thank you. If we can just bring Brian back up for a moment.
Thank you, Brian.
You can carry on in a second. Brian, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Brian.
Great
Your
to see
dinner
you.
is ready.
Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest
Awesome
of the
having you on.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much
thanks,
for
Brian.
your
Thank you.
thoughts.
Bye.
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 Sorry, Putri. Carry on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you requires like an understanding of the historical setting of that moment that led to her writing those letters. So I think the fact that now there's already a collection of letters that are more complete, that like at the beginning, it's said that it reduced the works of speculation, because we got the more complete imaginations of Tolkien's mind, basically the less curated version of his mind, because those were letters, not biographies. So I think, so I actually, even though I probably, it will take a while for me to finally get that book, but I'm really excited in the same reason that I'm really excited about finally having this collection of letters, basically the only written works by this figure that I admire so much, that had so much meaning to Indonesia. I mean, we even had a special day to commemorate her every April 21st. So some people kind of, kind of dismiss that probably because only letters. Yeah, but because she died at 25 years old, and at that time, she realized her limitations, that because she was from aristocratic family, she could not escape arranged marriage. And but even then, when her family asked them to marry somebody that was much older than her, she also gave him condition that I want to marry this guy, but the condition is that no one can stop me from continuing my education. I want to stay having my correspondences with my friends and my the other people that I've correspondence before, and I want to keep reading. And in one of the letters, she even said that she hoped she could live until 100 because there are so many things to do. You know, so when we talk about Tolkien, we often people think first about books and then his letters, or when you talk about people like C.S. Lewis, you first think about his books and then his letters, or Emily Dickinson, you first think about her poems and then her letters. But for Kartini, it's only letters. So I think, I'm still trying to finish that book, because it's 900 pages long. But I'm personally excited, waiting for my turn to finally have that more complete edition of Tolkien's letters, because I believe it will give me, reduce the speculation aspect of reading, doing a deep reading about Tolkien's works, just in the same way that I'm finally trying to understand more about the thoughts of Kartini, this figure that I admire. So even though this looks like a weird comparison, but it makes sense for me.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of comments I'm seeing that people are interested. So if you can email me a link to, you said these letters are online and your blog, I would love, I'll add those to the show notes for this so that people can find out more information from that. And yeah, I think that's, I'm going to ask Sara and to chime in and let's have some more conversations about Tolkien's letters and your experience with the first edition and what you're thinking about for the second.
So, Kris, we know that Sara's got a copy. Have you got a copy of the book yet, or have you seen it?
I hedged my bets because the release date in the States is after the release date in the UK. So I put in orders in both places, and we'll see which one gets here first.
So neither of them have got there yet, then.
Yeah. So and to give you an idea of what am I going to do with 2 copies? Well, be prepared to cry because this is my original copy of the first book, the first edition, the first whatever you call it, and it's pretty much destroyed. It's been loved. It's the Velveteen Rabbit, but in book form. And so having 2 copies of the letters actually makes perfect sense to me because I've basically loved this to death. So in terms of some of my favorite letters, obviously one of the places where this opens up to in the broken binding is the September 1954 letter to Mr. Hastings, where Tolkien tries to work through the biology of elves and humans mating. And then another letter that I think is really, really quite interesting is letter 310 to Camilla Unwin on May 20th, 1969, where Camilla was supposed to ask Tolkien what the purpose of life was. And Tolkien is talking about those who believe in a personal God creator do not think the universe is in itself worshipful, though devoted study of it may be one of the ways of honoring him, which I think as a scientist is really a lovely statement. And in terms of, and you guys have done yeoman's work in telling us what's coming. So I did get the sneak peek and I thank you for that. Some of the things I'm interested in, the new material in letter 43, where we're going to learn Tolkien, quote, also talks about how in many ways women are braver than men. I am looking forward to reading that. I am also reading forward to the new letter 282A to Rainer Unwin from 1965, where Tolkien, quote, makes a great analogy involving pirates. Tolkien and pirates in the same sentence. I know Sara knows reading my mind. I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to some of the later new letters where he's talking about still trying to write on the Silmarillion. And I also got a head start on Ultimate Geekdom. I love when he describes the weather. And there's a new material in letter 94 where he's talking, quote, briefly talks about some unusual weather in Birmingham and what people thought of it in December of 1944. So, of course, I had to go look up what the weather was like in Birmingham in 1944. And I found out that there was a freezing fog. So it'll be curious to see how he describes that. So those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to in the new edition.
Okay, do you want me to chime in here?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, well, asking me what my favorite letter is a bit like asking me to choose my favorite child. So it's really lucky I actually only have one child, so that's really helpful. But I'm picking out a favorite for you, and it might seem an odd choice. It's a favorite not because it reveals something about his writing, but because it reveals something about him. And have your tissues ready. It's letter 340. I never called Edith Luthien, but she was the source of the story that in time became the chief part of the Silmarillion. It was first conceived in a small woodland glade filled with hemlocks at Roos in Yorkshire, where I was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Humber garrison in 1917, and she was able to live with me for a while. In those days, her hair was raven, her skin clear, her eyes brighter than you have seen them, and she could sing and dance. But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos. And that bit gets me in the heart every single time. But there are so many letters. We use them all the time, and for lots and lots of different things. I have made great use of his letters to Michael on the subject of sex and women. And it will come as a surprise to nobody that I've disagreed with most of what he says. But I'm looking forward to extra detail on that, because I know there are more bits and pieces in his letters to Michael. Now, in the stuff that's coming, well, obviously, I'm just going to show off my book again because I can.
When did you get the book? When did it arrive?
It arrived just yesterday, so I've had very little time.
You've not read it all yet, though. You haven't had a chance to read it all yet.
Not quite, no, but I have had a really good flick through. There's one that's letter 331A, a draft from a letter to a patient in Broadmoor Hospital. And this really caught my eye because for those who don't know, Broadmoor Hospital is a hospital of high security for psychiatric patients who are deemed to be a danger not just to themselves but to the whole of society. It does contain some criminal psychiatric patients and some who have not been convicted of any criminal activity but are deemed really, really dangerous for psychiatric reasons.
It has some very famous prisoners of the past from when I was a child.
Peter Sutcliffe, Ian Brady.
Peter Sutcliffe, Brady. Yeah, it was the most notorious of places. When I saw a patient at Broadmoor Hospital, I kind of had to stop for a moment. Right. It was really like, wow, he's writing to a patient in Broadmoor Hospital. And for maybe international, good for you to point it out, because some international readers might just read Broadmoor Hospital and think that it's a hospital, a normal hospital, but it's really not. It's a place where not the worst people of society, but in some respects the most mentally unstable, some of the sickest people with a multitude of mental disorders. We have a family friend, sadly passed now, who used to work at Broadmoor, and he would never talk about his patients. It was a terrible place where people went to be almost shunned from society back then. So please carry on. Sorry.
No, you're right. It's good to give that context because it is the highest security psychiatric hospital in the UK. And in fact, up until relatively recently, up until 2008, if I remember rightly, every Monday morning they had to practice the siren warning for the entirety of the area. That is the siren warning given in case there is an escapee. And if that happens, everyone has to shelter in place, and children at local primary schools have to all be locked within classrooms. This ended in about 2008 because they moved a lot of the buildings away to somewhere even more isolated. But there was, at some point in the 1950s, there was an escaped prisoner, and it caused absolute mayhem for a while. What caught my attention with this letter is the sheer kindness of Tolkien's tone in the letter. It's super short, so I'll just read it to you. I am so glad that you have read my book again and have liked some of the poems, and also that you are feeling better. The hobbits, of course, were meant by me to be just ordinary, kindly human people, fond of food and fun, small in size, but strong and brave and very good at driving away all nasty creatures and at helping other people that were troubled by such things. There were, of course, nasty and dangerous creatures in their time, but in my story, these were conquered or destroyed by the hobbits and their friends, such as Tom Bombadil, who was not frightened by any of them, and when he commanded them to go away, they fled at once. I was very pleased to have your second letter. If you want to, or wish to have anything explained, write again. It is, I am afraid, too late now for this to reach you at Christmas. This is December 1971. But I hope you have some of the love and peace which you kindly wished me to have. It is my birthday on January 3rd, and you may see a picture of me in the Sunday Times on January 2nd. I just love that, the way in which he makes that very human connection, but also how he talks about confronting creatures, devils, demons, in a similar way that somebody who is in a psychiatric hospital is confronting their own demons. And I just thought this is a great letter for that. It's short, but I think it has a lot to say.
Absolutely. I had, as I said, I had to stop for a moment when I came across that letter. One, because of the location, and it clearly states a patient. And two, it's extraordinary. My favourite letter was not published and wasn't known at the time. It was a letter to Mary Fairbairn when Tolkien sends £50 as a gift. And if you would do me this kind favour, I would appreciate that you do not mention it any further. In other words, don't ever mention again that I've sent you £50 because you're doing me a favour. You're making me feel better.
Very British.
That's always, it is very British. And it's always been my favourite letter, always been my favourite letter, because it showed a side to Tolkien who may have later on in life been reasonably well off or reasonably comfortable, but £50 when he sent that in, I forget the date now, but at the time it was around £850.
Yeah, it's not a small amount of money.
It's not a small amount of money. And how many of us, even if we could, would actually give £850 to a reasonable stranger? Now he ended up buying artwork from her, so they had a relationship, but at that point they didn't. He found out that she was in financial trouble, and he wanted to help. So it's always been my favorite. It's been my favorite letter for a long time. But this new letter that you cite here is fast becoming one of my all-time favorites as well, because it shows a side to Tolkien that is extraordinary. His capacity to make sort of comparisons between what he knows that person must have been going through. He wasn't insensitive, so he must have known some of the difficulties that this person was going through, and he still managed to offer them hope and give them inspiration and show them that they're human beings and they deserve compassion through a simple short letter. It's wonderful.
I think he does that with quite a lot of letters, doesn't he? Though he's very good at doing that. It's one of the things that he's exceptionally good at, really.
I think there is some evidence to say that Tolkien may well have had depressive episodes in his own life. So there is a sense in which he may have understood an idea of fighting mental demons, not to the extent of anybody who's living in Broadmoor, by the way, but you know, a little touch maybe. And if I may, I've just got two more letters to mention, but not at that length. The first one is the no shit Sherlock moment of the letters, which is letter 347B, 24th of January 1973 to Sterling Lanier. I'm afraid you have hit on one quite serious point. The legends of the Silmarillion are largely mythological, mostly grim, and without any tinge of comedy. Yeah.
Perceptive.
Really, I'm stunned. And the last one is, and I love the energy of this one. This one was actually pointed out to me by Mercury Natis, so thank you very much, Mercury. And I went and had a look at it as soon as it arrived. From a letter to Donald Glover on the 23rd of November, 1972, letter 343A. I hope you'll find assistance with your project while you're in England, but I must warn you that I do not wish to discuss or talk about C.S. Lewis's work or my relations with him. This is for purely personal reasons. Drops the mic, walks away.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of loving the energy of that one.
He's a good mic dropper. And Kris, if you don't mind, I wanted to read you the little pirate snippet because it's hilarious.
Oh, thank you.
It's a bit of a mic drop right there itself. So it's okay. So I'm not going to read the entire letter, which is like a 1-paragraph extract from a longer letter. But at the end of it, so it's about Ace, right? So it's Donald Wollheim has offered to. I would like to use the money I've made off of your books to establish a Tolkien Award. And Tolkien's writing back, and Andrew mentioned this early in our chat of, you know, wouldn't it be better to like give the money to the author than do this stuff? And then, so here's his little quote. I'll read both sentences here. I cannot think that many writers would be much appeased by such a method of employing money due him and his publishers. What would a skipper say to a pirate who, spying an ominous sail and ensign on the horizon, said, "Shake hands. If you feel sore about this, I can assure you we'll spend all the profits of our loot on a hostel for poor sailors." He definitely had a way with words, but you know, conversely, even when he was frustrated or upset or really didn't like something, he had a way of, you know, talking directly to the movie crew behind Ackerman to say, you know, here's a bulleted list of everything you're doing that's absolutely horridly wrong, but I still think we can work together. Like let's continue investigating this, you know, or, you know, Donald Wollheim, all the letters we've seen before in the first edition letters, etc. You know, they amicably, to a sense, came to a conclusion of it. He didn't just, you know, go completely angry and lawsuits and everything else that he could have done. He was a man of letters and well-spoken and well-written, definitely, who could solve some rather tense situations. And we see this with the family too, where he's writing about some very difficult topics to his sons that they're going through in life. And it's honestly, you know, if you just went through and flagged the letters to his children, it would make an incredibly good parental guide to just publish that and say, like, here's how to be a good father. Look at these letters of him writing to his children. So it's and there's so much new family material in this new edition, because one of the things that Carpenter did when they had to edit down for space was, it's 1981, he's popular for Middle Earth, let's focus on Middle Earth more. So there's family letters in the first edition of Carpenter's book, but there's more in this book. It's more balanced. There's a lot of family letters added back into this new edition that they had to cut for space. They decided to focus a little bit more on what they thought fans would like. But now that it's restored to a more balanced view, we get a lot of family letters. We counted up about 40% of the letters added to this new edition are to his family and on family matters. They're very personal.
I think it comes back to what we were talking about with Brian and about the intention of Humphrey Carpenter and Christopher Tolkien. It's why I'm so pleased with this new volume and the fact that their intentions are now in plain sight for all of that. That's it, Sarah. Mine is inside my Kindle. Mine will arrive when it arrives. I'm just looking at the comments here, and Constantine makes a comment saying it's well known Tolkien was often short of money, but it's less well known that Tolkien was often helping people, helpful to people. What we were talking about with Sara there, and mentioned that he even sold his desk, and people are asking here. Or one person is asking here about that. Tolkien donated his desk to help the aged. And Trotter, you're quick at this, which we have the letter of that, don't we?
Yeah, it
where
is.
Tolkien explains. He basically donates his writing desk. It's now at the Wade. And he donates it to help the aged.
Sold through Sotheby's, I think. Sotheby's sold.
Through Sotheby's, correct.
Yeah.
And he could have kept money for himself, but he was always thinking of other people. And I think sometimes there's a misguided view of Tolkien that he was kind of this, cantankerous old curmudgeon who argued with everybody and sent nasty letters, but he didn't. He was lovely. He helped people. He was concerned about people. And I'm glad that the Broadmoor letter is here, because it's another demonstration of his kindness, and with his desk, I thought it was lovely that an older man would donate his desk to help the aged, who are a charity in the UK that literally help people who are older with heating and clothing and food. And not to be political, but we shouldn't live in a world where old people go hungry or have to choose between heating and food. But Tolkien was concerned about these things himself when he was himself at that time an older man dealing with his own wife's ill health. He could have been forgiven for saying, no, I'm just going to concentrate on me. And he didn't. He still had capacity and time and energy to be good to other people. And a lot of the time, complete strangers. It's
that's part of the letters in general. It shows the humanity. I think that I've come across way too many people who want to put Tolkien on a pedestal and make him sort of this larger than life icon. He was already more brilliant than all of us put together. I mean, the man was brilliant and creative, but he wasn't perfect.
Nope.
And he embraced his own perfections in it. And I love, like, when he gets into time crunches and he misses deadlines and he forgets to do things for people and he makes mistakes. And it's all the more endearing because it's sort of like, well, if Tolkien can screw up, then maybe there's hope for the rest of us,
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. I don't know if it survived into our review, but when we were writing the review, I did add a point. I can't find the page now, but our review of the book, I did say that people who are looking for Tolkien's excuses, do not be afraid. There are plenty more of them too. His excuses are utterly fantastic. He's the proverbial guy whose dog ate his homework. He's always got a family crisis. He's always got some sort of drama ready for a missed deadline. And I love all of those things because it really does show the English sort of gentleman in him. My own father was the same. My grandfather was very similar, and I think I've probably made excuses about missing timelines to the guys on the guide. because it's a very English thing to do, is have your excuses ready for the silly things that you get wrong, not for serious things. But he always had wonderful excuses ready, and just click of a finger, oh, I've got an excuse ready. I'll just give you it. I love it, and I love that those things are not hidden. He's very eccentric, and as you say,
I think I'm going to copy them down and just use them every time I miss a deadline. I'm just going to quote from Tolkien's letters.
If Tolkien can do it, then so can you, Sarah.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very fair. Tim was very interested in my drink, by the way. This isn't vodka. This is water.
This is water of life. Wishkavaha.
Okay. Putri.
Yeah.
Hello. How did you get into Tolkien? Being obviously from Borneo, I can't imagine that there were many English books on the shelves when you were young, or maybe I'm wrong. How did you come across them?
Yeah, I think the reason why Tolkien really resonated to me, aside from the aspect about the storytelling aspect that remind me so much of so many folklore and folk tales I grew up with, I think it was also a more personal reason, because of course at that time the first Tolkien books that I read were The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Rings, and they were the translated versions, of course. I saw them like a huge piles of those books at the bookstore around 2002. So, but that I know that was also the release of the movies, but it was not necessarily because of the movies, more like because I was curious about who this author is that I keep reading about in so many articles about the movies, So I just, I bought them out of whim, and then I started reading them, and then I realized that aside from the storytelling aspect, it actually resonated so much to me because since the beginning, I think there's always be a personal connection with the things that happen around me, and how Tolkien depict the world and the characters inside it through his works. Because at the time in year 2002, it was like I was at high school at the time, still a teenager, but 2002 was also a rather maybe a tumultuous year for me, because 2002 was only 4 years after the basically the downfall. I think the downfall of the New Order regime in Indonesia, which was basically a right-wing, a military-backed authoritarian regime that had ruled for 32 years. Like we had the same president for 32 years, president in quote, of course.
Sadly, she's breaking up for me. I think we may have lost your audio there, Putri. Hopefully we'll have you back momentarily, but yeah. So Sara, what was your introduction to Tolkien? 30 seconds, less than what Alan would get out of you when you're on the prancing pony.
My dad.
Oh,
awesome.
He had
Hello?
he had a copy of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
There we go.
My dad had a copy of the Lord of the Rings on his bookshelf, and I was, I think, 8, and I was one of those ridiculously precocious readers, and he handed it to me in the hopes that it would keep me quiet for a little while, and it did, and that is the copy that I still have on my bookshelf, from which I read at his funeral. I fell in love with it. I loved the world that he had created. I got slightly confused because I read The Hobbit after I read The Lord of the Rings. So I got a little bit confused, and then I had to go back and read The Lord of the Rings again, as you do. But yeah, it's always been something that has drawn me. And now I am slightly older than 8. Every single time I read it, I get something different from it, because it's like an onion, right? You just find lots of different things. It depends what it is that you're kind of going through in your life at the time, but I think you find something different in it every single time, and that's just glorious. So there you are, my 30-second version.
There you go. And Kris, your 30-second version?
It changes with us, doesn't it, Sarah?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
As we change, somehow the text is different, or it means something completely different.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
I would have been 13 or 14. It would have been 1973, 1976, 1977, right before the Bakshi film came out. Because I still have my movie program that we bought, especially in the theater, for the Bakshi film. And I wanted for either my birthday or Christmas that foil-covered Ballantine paperback, 4 novels in one box slipcover, which I still own, although the books don't quite fit in the slipcover like they used to. Again, they've been velveteen, rabbity, loved like everything else. So it's been part of my life for a very long time.
Oh, yeah, awesome. And thank you, Putri. I know you had connection issues, so we had to kind of move along a little bit from your story, but we loved hearing that as well. So we have this new edition of Letters, and we're all excited to see it. It is fantastic. I recommend everybody get it. There's absolutely no reason you should be using your first edition anymore. Move to the second edition. It is everything that was in the first plus more.
I've got one more letter that I wanted to show
to
people, because this is slightly different to the other two. If you want to make that one,
I'm pulling you up.
So this is a letter from Humphrey Carpenter, and this was done later on, after the biography and various other books that he did, various biographies that he'd done. And it's actually quite a sad letter in a certain case, because he says that out of the books that he's written, there's only 2 he actually liked. One was the Oxford Companion to Children's Literature, and the other was Secret Gardens. So you'll notice he doesn't mention the book that's next to it on the. Now, I think. Well, I actually spoke to Marie Pritchard, who's his widow, because I actually asked her about this letter on Tuesday, and she said that he's making that up and it's not true what's in there, which is actually quite interesting. But I also think that it's because of what I mentioned earlier, that as far as he was concerned, that book wasn't finished. And I think the same goes for the biography as well. I don't think he ever thought that the biography was finished as he wanted it to be. And certainly both those 2 books, I don't think Humphrey during his lifetime actually thought were as good as books as he would have liked them to have been. But I think now with this new version of Letters, I think this is helping with the balance. But what I wanted to talk a bit about was, well, what else can we expect really from Humphrey? There's a few things. Obviously, from a collecting point of view, I would expect that we'll see a deluxe edition of the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't think they did one immediately, because they want to see how the book does really before you bring out a deluxe edition. But we've also got things like, well, what about an audiobook? Now, we've never really had an audiobook of letters. There's been some unofficial ones. I think there's someone on YouTube managed to read all the letters out. I don't know how on earth they managed to get away with that, but anyway, they did. So I'd love to see. I think this will make a great audiobook, and actually just reading them out and actually having someone say, like, I would like to see my favourite vet at the moment on All Creatures Great and Small read it, but which is Samuel West. But I also think now that Andy Serkis could well be picked for it because he's very popular, and I think he'd do a good job. I think you really want that. This will make a superb audiobook. But you also then come on to what about biography? There's been no audiobook for that either, for the biography. And another thing I'd love to see HarperCollins do is an expanded biography, because there's been an awful lot of stuff that's come out about Tolkien that Christopher's done since he actually, since the biography was written. The whole history of Middle Earth, none of that's really mentioned that much in the biography. So I'd like to see them do an expanded biography, and also I'd like to see that as an audiobook as well. I think if you're going to do an audiobook of one of them, I think you should do both. Really, I think they should both be done as well, because they do complement each other. And of course, the final thing to do with letters is, well, what about the other letters that are there? There are a lot more letters that are available now that have come to light since the 1980s, and I certainly think I'd love to see at least a volume 2, but we could possibly have a volume 2, a volume 3. He at some point, I think you might even get up to 4 volumes. There's so many of them, and they're so interesting. The letters that we have on the guide, they're absolutely fascinating. Some of the letters as well, and they're certainly going back to the A to B minus one. There's lots of A's and B's in those letters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a slightly. I'm conflicted with Tolkien's letters, because obviously we have a lot on the guide, but I'm also a big fan of T.S. Eliot, and we are up to 9 volumes of his letters, and it's warts and all. And then on top of the letters that weren't published on paper, there is also the website that then publishes the rest of them for free. With Tolkien, I actually believe that there's an opportunity for HarperCollins to really find out exactly what fans want. And there's two groups essentially. There are people like us who want everything, and then there are readers of Tolkien.
To be honest, though, Phil, I don't think we do want everything, because some of them aren't very interesting. I want them the same way that Humphrey did it, by actually grading the letters.
Absolutely, I think that's a great idea.
Yes,
but there are fans out there, and their wishes are as legitimate as anybody else's, where they want reams and reams and reams, or volumes and volumes and volumes. And I don't believe with Tolkien that will actually work for HarperCollins and for how they approach Tolkien publishing. I think what would be a better plan that would long term have potential for giving us more letters and more volumes is if they actually curate and do themes of letters. Now, I don't mean that they focus just on Beowulf or just on Sir Gawain or just on Middle Earth, but create volumes that are more themed and more focused on a selection of subjects. They will soon see within 3 or 4 volumes where the interest in Tolkien is. And what I would prefer, from a publishing point of view, I would prefer HarperCollins to find out exactly where the interest lies from readers and publish more in that area than publish one more volume that maybe doesn't sell as well because it's far too general. Now, other people can disagree on that and say, well, no, he can sustain prolonged publication, but HarperCollins are certainly of the view so far, and I hope that this letters volume changes their mind. So all of you in the chat, go and buy 2 copies, one for the week and one for Sunday Best, and then there's a chance that they'll go, well, there is interest here. But if they do a more generalized volume, and maybe it doesn't sell as well because people, the average reader doesn't want to know as much about the day in, day out of his life. They know enough already, and there is a lot of information there in that respect. It may well stunt any future sales. So I think if they released over maybe a 5 or 6 year period volumes that focused more subtly on different subjects, I think they would soon find where the interest is in all of the readers, because we are the extreme end. And while I'm greedy and selfish in respect of I want more letters, you know, we want tens of thousands of letters on the guide, and so do the people who use it. But that doesn't serve HarperCollins or their interests. That doesn't pay the bills for them. So I would love it if they would find out exactly where the interests are, the focused subjects that will sell more books. Because if they can sell 10 volumes over the next 20 years of more focused volume, you know, more focused subjects, then I would prefer that than just to get one more volume. I would prefer 20 years of future publications.
I would rather have one more volume than none, though. So that's
of course, of course.
And I think there's definitely enough. There's enough there for one very interesting additional volume, and then, but more than that as well. But there's at least enough material. There's more than enough material for one very interesting second volume.
On the guide alone, we have enough for 2 volumes. One being generally biographical, and another being really focused on Middle Earth, and on imagined, on his secondary world and imagined writings. There's enough, and we've touched 1% of all the letters out there, so there's definitely a lot.
Yeah, well, more turn up all the time. We actually had some turned up this week. Well, one turned up this week, a new letter. So it's a constant.
It'll be never ending. So and that's an issue that this revised edition had to deal with, was how do you reference chronological letters in some systematic way when you already have a system set in stone in 1981. You know, we use letter numbers, and in the second edition they added alphanumeric. They add alpha to the end. They put the letters in to blend them in and insert them. But no new letters show up every day. So when the second volume comes out, we'll have another schema for that book if it ever happens, and then we'll find more letters that'll make it worth publishing, you know, a third volume someday. That's the hope, is that these letters are fascinating, and the audience is very different today from 40 plus years ago. So this is an excellent addition to the Tolkien corpus. I think this new book that we have, the revised and expanded edition, there are Sara, there are many more letters out there. We've tried with our guide to help people find what else is out there in a respectful way. So we're not a publisher. We don't have rights to letters, but you can find out what he's written and where they might be, and then use our guide to help you find the right people to talk to. Go visit the Wheaton College and the Wade Center, which has 40, 50 letters. Go visit Marquette, visit the Bodleian. They have archives of these letters that you can study. And so it's important, I think, for fans and scholars to know how much more is out there. It feels endless from our perspective, in the sense that I think on the trail, you said this morning on the today's Tolkien Times Fandom Friday episode that for 4 people, we probably have 20 years of work that we know, that we've documented what we need to do to put into this guide. It'll start moving faster, and we'll get more help, I hope, along the way. We have plenty of plans along that, but the sheer volume of known material is vast, and to most people, it's a book from Carpenter from 81 and now from 2023, but and it's hard to find all these little references scattered around, quotes in auction catalogs and old fanzines and important scholarly books that found unpublished material and got permission and put some of these unpublished letters into them. So knowing where those are, so you can find bits of pieces of what Tolkien wrote, is what the purpose of our guide is not to be a primary source, but a reference system to find all those primary sources.
And of course, we we can't be a source for the primary texts. But obviously, those primary texts are in many different places, and the more references we have, and the more letters we add, the more books that we sift through, we will find more information. I almost didn't tell Alan the number that I'd come up with because I didn't want to scare you guys away. We have so much to add. It will be years, a decade or two, before we can say that we are anywhere near not complete. We will never be complete, but until we're at a kind of point where we can say, right, okay, we've added everything that's possible, and now all we need to do is correct our spelling mistakes or my spelling mistakes, and get on with adding new publications. It'll be a long, long time because there are 4 of us. And obviously, we have to be very careful with copyright. So we can't be adding 20, 30, 40, 50 people into the entry system because there are materials there which are sensitive. We have to protect them. But there are 4 of us essentially trying to catch up on what is now 60 years of scholarship and academia on Tolkien. Mm-hmm. So it will be a while. So yeah, at some point we will, maybe next year, we will talk to you all more about how you can help adding, well, not adding, but suggesting tags and references, and maybe even suggestions for summaries.
Well,
in a
people
more
can do that
way.
already as well. We want people to do this. We want to get more people to come to look at the letter and say, well, add a reference. Why is this reference not there, or something? And that's exactly the sort of thing that because we might not think or even know about that, or. And also, we would love if people do actually have letters that we'd love to put them into the guide, just so that we try and make it more get closer to having all the letters that we're aware of. So I know if people have them, we'd love to get those in, or even know where people who've got them, just to give us some clues as to where they might be. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Every quote, every summary, every entry that we can add, it gives more and more back to the community. So it was one of the questions I was asked, how can we contribute? And that's obviously one of them. Every letter, as I'm sure many of you know, every letter has a start discussion or a view discussion tab at the top of the page. If you have suggestions on summaries or corrections, use the discussion to suggest tags and references if you know of other references to where letters are noted or quoted. Whatever it is, we are desperate for your help. We're not academics, and we're not trying to create an academic platform that is scary for people who aren't academics. We want academics to be able to come along and say, hey Phil, hey Urulókë, whoever, that needs to be here. Why isn't that tag there? That tag needs to be in this letter. So please put it in, and we'll get it added. And next year we'll have a think about a system that is better, where you can actually make direct suggestions on the letter page. You can go to the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien and say, well, wait a minute, guys, you miss out an entire paragraph here. So academics aren't scary. No, you're right. You're right.
No, I didn't take it what you were saying in that way. Yeah. It's meant to be collaborative and useful, not just for academia and for scholars, but for fans, for collectors. It will grow. We're not we're reaching end of time, and it's super late for some of our guests here. So I think we're about ready to wrap up. But do stay tuned. We will hopefully have all of you back on as guests. This has been incredibly fun sharing our time with you.
Anytime.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It's been really
thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will have more updates on the guide through our videos here and on the website and everywhere. And I will go back and put in show notes links to all of our guests and websites and social media presences, because they're fantastic and you should follow them and read what they write. And so thank you absolutely for everyone who stayed here to watch with us and those who are joining us on rewatches later. It's been fantastic. It's a great book. Go buy it at your local bookseller. Support small local booksellers every time you can. And it's been awesome. Thank you again so much for everything that you've done.
Thanks,
Thanks
Sara.
for having me on.
And thanks, Putri.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you to Brian Sibley.
Yes.
Thanks, Brian.